you
For
know,
the early people on the call, they can see a corgi.
It's so cute. I used to be one of those people who was not that interested in dogs and like especially other people's dogs. And then I got a dog and like I'm like it's a transformative experience.
I'm still waiting for that moment. She's like such a brat sometimes. Anyway, meta conversation you were going to say about like all the different people who are going to be participating on the panel.
Yeah, and making sure that like we're coming out of this with like good, like some of it's like esoteric conversation stuff and some of it's like practical, okay, here's something we can do right now that we should like change what we're doing or institute something or even just in the discussions about this, Ernest, I haven't talked to you about this yet, but we've decided we need a spin-off series, which is addressing the racial wealth gap.
Oh my God, yes. One of the things I'm going to bring up is like, even though I'm a transportation planner, I'm like, hey, when are we going to deal with the fact that like housing affordability is like the main root of a bunch of these issues, and going all the way back to redlining, and probably before that, like we could just keep ignoring the elephant in the room, or we could actually address it with a concrete program. Just my idea.
I think it's also something that like YIMBY movement has like had a lot of conversations that are disconnected, but about this kind of like, okay, we've got the concept of redlining, like YIMBYs love to talk about that. We've got this concept of like, you know, but we're very uncomfortable about like, what do we think about home ownership, right? Like we think
Andre Perry. Yeah.
Yes, and one of the things, I don't want to give away my intro, but you know, well, I won't say it, but I think homeownership is so critical, especially in this country, because so many other elements are tied to that. So either you need to disconnect them, right? Or you need to allow Black and brown people to own homes in places that are rich in resources. But like, you should probably do both. But this whole concept of like affordable housing can only be through rental is a joke.
And this is kind of are we going to talk about the BMR program and how it's like not real ownership?
It's not.
Like, it's like all the worst parts
of it takes so long to get through the program. One of my best friends, who may be watching this, in fact, signed up for the program, you know, a decade ago, was pulled from the lottery 4 years ago for a project in San Francisco, and the project kept getting delayed. And he kept gaining, you know, slow amounts of income. And he finally ended up going maybe just $2,000 over their threshold, and they kicked him off. And he's like, well, had you done this 4 years ago when you pulled me off of the lottery, then I would own a home right now, wouldn't I?
Yeah, it's this kind of like, oh, you pulled yourself out of poverty, so now we'll push you back down. Yeah.
My head hurts.
So Warren, and I just want to flag, you know, I sent you those questions. They're still on my question list somewhere when I find that. But like, we can have the conversation you want to have. Like, you know, like I'm from Atlanta. I have a lot of thoughts about Black people and home ownership. And so to know, I just watched a documentary about my family and about like Black farms being stolen from Black farmers over the last century.
Oh my God.
It's like the same story as Black homes being stolen from Black people over the last couple of decades. So like, I have a lot there, but we can also talk about transportation or something.
Someone needs to try and keep us on track, because I could have this conversation for 5 years. So I don't know.
It won't be me, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Other people.
There's tech support.
For the 100 people who are like, why are they already talking about this? Like, just a heads up, this is what it's going to be, is me and Ernest just like patty caking about how we're going to fix all the world's problems, which I'm here for.
I'm just going to interrupt as tech support. For people who are still trickling in, we're going to spend another 2 or 3 minutes shooting the shit, and we will officially start at, I think, 6:04, but enjoy the chatter before that. Yes, please continue to shoot the shit.
Right. Well, Ernest, I don't want to give away my intro, but you're going to love kind of the history of my family and like how we intersect with that topic. And that's pretty much how I got into planning. So can't wait.
Ooh. No, I was really hoping to kind of start this with like, who are we as people?
Yeah.
Because if you want to stand anti-racism, you should understand that, like, through like what it has done to Black people and their families, and it tells a story through mine, and I'm sure it tells one through yours. And then I think that'll be a good launching off point.
Here I'm going to blow a bunch of people's minds right now. Like, being Black and being Black and being Black are not the same thing. You know, like, I'm light-skinned, and that is its own storyline that is very different from much darker men who are much bigger than me, who are much straighter than me as well. And all of those intersections between colorism, between sexuality, between masculine presence, and Black men especially, are rich in history, but also rife with challenges that are put on us in a way that I think have escaped from a lot of privilege. Like, I'm gonna own that up front. And also I recognize that there are some things that even I, being the mayor's policy director, I'm still afraid of the police, right? Like, I think that that's something that people struggle to kind of understand, is that, like, kind of your point earlier, like, oh, you know, you've pulled yourself out of poverty or whatever. Like, there's so many things that we can do to climb up into ranks of power, and still I might be mistaken for someone else and get shot. And that is something that I carry every day. And, like, I bring that to work every day. Like, that's real. And how we intersect that then with, you know, anti-racism and urban planning and urbanism is, like, hard. It's really hard.
Now, one thing Andre was speaking to, he was on the Gimme Shelter podcast, I guess, last week, and about this notion of gentrification arises because when people invest in Black communities, they invest in places and not in people. So they make the place one that will be attractive to white people's interests, and is really conditional on there being fewer Black people to make them just uncomfortable as they enter that place. And that's where the value add comes from. That you have to really reimagine, who and what are you investing in when you have an opportunity zone program.
Right. The thing that I struggle with when people are like, oh, you're a gentrifier, you know, gentrification, is that not to be mansplaining, but, like, the term gentrification is investment in place. And that's important, Ernest, because oftentimes people use that as the same word as displacement. And even within displacement, there is social displacement. The people around me don't look like me, and I feel a kind of way about that. There's economic displacement, which is I can't afford anything around me anymore, so I have to go all the way over here to, you know, buy groceries or whatever. And then there's physical displacement, which is the big one. You know, all of them are big, but someone kicked me out of my home, or I can't afford to live here anymore because the rent got too expensive, and I am physically, socially, economically displaced from the culture center that I used to have. And that, to me, is like the intersection between housing, economic development, and transportation. I live here, and I'm constantly trying to intersect. This is sort of like
that note. No, that's like a great place for us to officially start. So thank you so much for everybody who's joining. I'm here as technical support. So I just want to encourage people, definitely start leaving questions already in the Q&A section, but I'm going to turn it over to Ernest to introduce us.
All right. Well, welcome to YIMBY Action's conversation on anti-racism and urbanism. YIMBY Action is a network of pro-housing activists fighting for more inclusive housing policies. We drive policy change to increase the supply of housing at all levels and bring down the cost of living in opportunity-rich cities and towns. My name is Ernest Brown, and it is my privilege to serve as the YIMBY Action board chair. And if what you hear today resonates with you, please consider becoming a member at yimbyaction.org/join. YIMBY Action is launching this series of conversations and an exercise to take to heart the message of the recent uprisings. Our hope is that we can elevate ideas and practices that will help us reimagine how we shape cities and to whose benefit we create that change. We hope that this series can help us explore the concept of anti-racism in urbanism. How can the policies of urbanism become a force that tears down institutional racism and reduces the racial wealth gap? How does the urbanist movement address its own history and current participation in upholding white supremacy? We're not going to answer all these questions today, but we hope to get started down this path. So joining me for the first of these conversations is Warren Logan. And because we're going to get a bit more deep into who we each are in this conversation, I'm going to let Warren introduce himself.
Sure. Hey, everybody out there. I'm Warren Logan. I'll start by saying who I am, right? Like, I am a Black gay man who lives in Oakland. So let's get that all together anyway. I serve as the mayor's policy director of mobility and interagency relations. And I find the role to be fascinating. I think we're going to kind of intersect a little bit of what I do for the mayor and the city of Oakland into this conversation. One of the things that I want to start out by saying is that I'm one person, and I'm excited to be a part of this series. And I want to encourage everyone who's listening or watching for that matter to recognize that my perspectives may not jive with even other African Americans in the city, in this building, let alone in the entire country. And that is perfectly okay. And I'm down for the debate. But I just want people to kind of recognize that we're all trying to piece together what this moment turn movement really is, and how we all engage in that. And I thank each one of you for participating in that dialogue in however way you can.
Thanks, Warren. So to start, and I'll demonstrate myself just to sort of hopefully lay the groundwork. How did you come to be where you are in the building that you're in, doing the work that you're doing? For me, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. My family's from South Georgia. Kind of my parents both migrated there, sort of in the 60s, 70s, the first people to experience integrated classrooms, that whole shtick. But nonetheless, I got to grow up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in South DeKalb County, which, despite being predominantly Black, is not poor. It is one of the few majority Black counties that are above average income in this country. So I got a pretty unique educational experience because of that. The school out in Atlanta, then moved out to the Bay Area to work in the nonprofit sector, and now currently work in healthcare. But since I've been here, I've been driven to be involved in housing activism in a way I was not at home, because I just see how much suffering it is putting on people who look like me. When I worked in San Francisco, it was just incredible that I would get up in the morning, go to BART to get on the BART station in Oakland. And when I came up from underground in San Francisco, basically the only people who had my skin tone were homeless. And that was not healthy for my mental health. So I was happy to get out of there when I got a job in Oakland. So that's really just part of how I show up to this work that I'm doing here with TMB Action. And we just appreciate kind of hearing how you got to where you are, both professionally, but also personally, Warren.
Yeah, thank you, Ernest. I think that's critical. Starting all the way back from childhood, I will share that I grew up in a very, very white neighborhood. So white, in fact, that when we took the census, they had to collapse the two census tracts, or I guess the block groups, because we were the only Black family in that neighborhood. I went to a nearly entirely white private school in La Jolla, California, which is, in San Diego. And I recognize every day that I grew up with a lot of privilege. So I'm gonna own that as my experience. I moved to Los Angeles for college, and I have a degree in urban studies from Occidental College. And part of the reason that I chose that school was for its reputation on, liberal arts, studying the intersection of different subjects and not just focused on one silo. And the program within that for environmental studies is about community organizing, lifting up voices and rich discussion and dialogue for, everyone in the community. And I think that that's so critical. I actually ended up going to Berkeley directly following my graduation because there was a recession. And again, I had privilege. I'm gonna own that as an opportunity. But I think what kept me in the Bay Area following, getting a master's degree in city planning at Berkeley was that I felt like I belonged here. And I think you're gonna hear me say this word a couple of times, that I feel like my entire identity is celebrated here in the Bay, and especially in Oakland. That when I walk down the street, I feel like my entire body is represented in the people that I interact with, and ideally in the policies that the city even encourages. What brought me to planning actually is a story that I wanna share briefly about my now 103-year-old grandfather, who texted me a few days ago and was like, hey, what are you up to? So you can imagine that. My grandfather grew up in Lima, Oklahoma. His grandparents were slaves. So like he tells stories of our history. And I want to just kind of remind people that the idea that slavery happened so long ago that we learned in the history books is actually only a few generations ago. And I just want to kind of like leave that there just to remind people. My grandfather was the first African-American Board of Realtors president in Southern California. My dad was the second. And my grandfather was instrumental in helping younger Black families get into homes that they would never have been able to get to by making deals, by showing them homes that they would never have been allowed to see. And he shared with me how instrumental it was to make sure that Black families, in our case, were able to have a piece of, in his words, the American dream, a piece of real estate that they felt they could invest in and in their community. And my dad said the same thing, investing in community is so critical. What's interesting about that story that he shared with me is that he saw his role as in part an outside agitator to sort of navigate around the structures that already existed. And that in a different life, he might have been, it's funny because both he and my dad thought about running for office and ultimately never did. And instead they're sort of on the outside of that conversation. And I think that it's interesting that I've landed on the inside of the government track. And I often find myself in this interesting conversation with my family members about the different roles that each of us take inside and outside of a policy conversation to ideally move us towards a more equitable future, even if it's just, a simple policy like a bike lane or something like that. So it's all of that has brought me to, I think, my role in city planning. And frankly, and I think most of the people who probably know me, who've ever walked down the street with me, the only thing I care about at the end of the day is meeting new people and understanding like what they're all about, what their stories are, and how I can help them. And I find that the role that I'm in now, and frankly, all of the roles I've had, have helped me do that. And so I'll leave it there for now. Ernest, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. The sense of belonging you get to feel in the Bay Area is like something that even being home, it's hard to sort of compare it to. And it is something very, very special about this place that I'm always torn that, that this feeling of belonging is also accompanied by this lack of sense of stability in this place.
Yeah.
And as warm as the embrace is, it also doesn't feel very permanent. So just that had to share that. Just so I can make sure the folks who are watching and listening sort of, again, get to better understand you. So when we turn to Q&A, they have some good questions lined up. Just help us understand, so what is the work you're doing now in the mayor's office? And a lot of it is like rapid response, really exciting stuff. So now if you want to share some of what's going on in this pandemic response, I think that would also be super helpful to folks.
So let's talk about before COVID. I can describe that relatively succinctly. So
what you signed up for.
Yeah, right. So before COVID, my role in the mayor's office was an advisor to the mayor to share my perspective and research and understanding about what role transportation can play in the city of Oakland, and then what role the city of Oakland can play in the region. I really appreciate that Mayor Libby Schaaf thinks of Oakland, especially as a leader for a lot of the other cities in the Bay as well. And so there's that really cool opportunity to showcase how awesome Oakland is to the rest of the country and to the rest of the world. A big portion of my role is, again, as I mentioned before, about relationships. Most of my day during and before COVID was about meeting people and, again, understanding what they were all about and how our office could partner with them ideally to align on our different goals. And the way that each of the policy directors typically operate within a city structure is we sort of work hand in glove with the city administrators to partner with different departments to affect change in our different policies and stand up programs throughout the city. That process can be really slow and cumbersome and takes a lot of massaging. And the reason I say that is because then COVID hit. And for folks who don't work in government, I will share with you that whenever there's an emergency, most government agencies will stand up what's called an emergency operations center. And we pluck away all of the leaders in every single department and create sort of like the Justice League for that incident. And we pull really smart people just out of their spots and say, like, I know you don't normally do this, but you're smart and you'll figure it out. And so about 2 weeks into COVID, when we kind of started shelter in place, I got pulled into the resident support group or under operations and helped manage the city's testing program. So to be clear, I'm not a doctor and I'm not an epidemiologist, but I know a thing or two about logistics. And I will say that this is in some part probably the most fun, if I can say that, because it's a freaking pandemic, that I've at least ever had working for government, because it showcases just how quickly government really can move when we are aligned on our goals. We bring the smartest, brightest people together and give them kind of the opportunity to test new ideas in a sandbox of sorts. And so I will say that the last 3 months have been incredibly tiring. I'm like exhausted, but I also am encouraged to see that there's so many amazing people I get to work with, and hopefully some of them are watching right now. So to you all, like, thank you for partnering with me on this work and to showcase just how awesome we really can be in showing up for our community. So that's pre-COVID and during COVID.
One thing you really said there are two things maybe. What I really admired you in the times we've met before of just like when you say community engagement, you mean something different than what typical people in government or positions of power tend to mean. You've been pretty good on it. Tell me if I'm getting what you said wrong, but no, the idea, it is your job to go to where the people are and hear what their concerns, problems, idea solutions might be, rather than simply having an open door at your office in City Hall. And I just really, and you could just talk a little bit about that philosophy. And then secondly, just because I think it's kind of related, the way we've seen the way government operates change under this tremendous pressure that is this pandemic is, it's terrifying to live amidst this amount of death and destruction. But it is also, as someone who believes in government, incredibly exciting to see the type of government that could address all those other crises that don't have an emergency operations center button. What if we had a Justice League for housing and homelessness under normal situations? What if we had a Justice League for police brutality under normal situations? Because I got to see the Justice League for COVID. And I'm just curious how you think about what you all are demonstrating your capabilities are when you are resourced properly and you are given aligned orders and clear direction and opportunity to make some mistakes, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'm going to spend more time on that second question. I will say quickly that, you know, my philosophy on engagement is very much anti-outreach, anti-information, which is to say that I think that not just government stakeholders, but a lot of groups do a very good job of sharing out information. We have a lot of technology that helps you share out information. There's Twitter, there's Facebook, whatever. It's a whole different cloth to like have a conversation with someone in a very vulnerable space. And so I actually discourage people from meeting me in my office. Most people will find that I regularly will say like, oh, let me take you to coffee. Let's go meet in your neighborhood. As a really good example of kind of the engagement I like is there's a neighborhood crime prevention group in the Melrose district here in Oakland. And they, you know, are very upset about this really busy street on, you know, a portion of Foothill, which is true. It's a very busy, dangerous street. And they're like, you just need to see it, right? Like you're not believing us. So just come, you know, this woman said, she's like, I dare you, come to my house at night on a Friday night and you will see what this is like. And I was like, great, I'll bring the chips and wine and let's see how it goes. And it was great to just sit on her porch and talk about her life living in this home for many years and watching how the street has changed. And then her understanding of like safety and its connection to community. That to me is what this work is all about. And I actually find it kind of fun to just listen to people. It also was an opportunity to kind of level set with her, not only what the challenges and shortcomings were of both, you know, my office or the DOT or whatever, but also to help guide her in terms of like a strategy for getting what she wanted done, whether that's, hey, don't email 30 people at once because then 30 people are going to ignore you versus email these 3 people and I will make sure they follow up, right? Like giving people the tools that they need to actually succeed in a really clear format is critical. And I've shared this before on another panel a couple of days ago. Knowing how to communicate with government is a privilege. Like we have our own language. We're very good at asking specific questions and not taking any answers. And so knowing who to talk to, knowing how to talk to them and knowing what questions you can and can't ask is so tricky. So I'm gonna leave that there. To your second question about the Emergency Operations Center, the Justice League for other subjects, I was actually gonna bring that up later on, but I'll talk about it now. I think that the genie is out of the bottle in terms of government's ability, well, for some governments, I can't speak to a federal response, but locally, I think the genie is out of the bottle in terms of the ways in which our city, and by extension other cities in the Bay Area, can respond swiftly to emergencies. And I think moving forward, it is our responsibility in the government, and by extension all of you, to hold us accountable to this, to respond to things that we say are emergencies, like they are emergencies. So if we said that COVID was a state of emergency, and the state is saying that homelessness is an emergency, we should probably stand up an emergency operations center that is given swift authority to do the things that need to be done. And again, to your point, Ernest, they have the ability to fail and fail fast if they need to, and the security to know that they can continue doing their work and iterate on that process. Because that's ultimately what the EOC stands for. It's a group of really smart people figuring it out along the way, but trusting each other enough to say, we're gonna get through this and we have to do it quickly because it's an emergency. The same should be true for housing, for racism, and even perhaps for traffic safety. A number of people die every day on our streets, and that to me is also an emergency when you get hit by a car. And so I really challenge, for anyone who works in the government who's listening to this, to really push for those types of interagency groups that can really move swiftly and, not be afraid to fail, but like take risks and try new things. I've seen our government and our teams try a lot of new strategies in the last 3 weeks, let alone 3 months. We deployed text message surveying the other day. Originally it was like, you have to do an intercept survey, you need to have focus groups, and we put up flyers in a matter of days, and you just text flex to our number, and you get delivered an SMS survey of all the different questions we are wanting to engage with you about our Open Streets, Flex Streets program. We'd never done that before, right? Our city council meetings are now online. The mayor is having virtual town halls, I think every other week now, right? Why we should continue to do a lot of the things that we're doing, because it expands access, and frankly is a lesson learned for holding us better accountable to our work.
No, I think I actually saw the Flex Streets flyers in Chinatown. So, and you're getting them all in the
survey?
No, I was on a walk, just like leisurely walk. So, but I'll take it next time I'm out, I promise. I did want to integrate one audience question that sort of builds off what you were just addressing. I'm going to read it more or less verbatim, from a white person though. I'm hoping Logan can talk about the recent critiques we have been hearing about slow streets and other streamlined reallocation of streetscapes during the pandemic as being opportunistically pushed by white urbanists. I know Logan may have some strong feelings about that, and yet there may be ways white urbanists like me can indeed do better. So I think we're hearing just some sort of discomfort, anxiety about the moving quickly break things, who is doing the moving, who is breaking things, whose things are being broken.
Yes.
And just how do we think about that as we try to operate in this new manner?
I think that's a great point. And I will share that I appreciate criticism of our program. I'm not afraid of that. And there are plenty of mistakes that we've made along the way. So I'm going to acknowledge that up front. I think that there's been a lot of buzz about Oakland slow streets that in part, don't get me wrong, I love our team and I think they're doing an amazing job. And you're kind of giving us credit for something that we haven't done. So I kind of want to temper a little bit of the buzz around the slow streets movement throughout the country or throughout the world. Let's start there. Some of the criticism that we received in part from slow streets in its first iteration was that we didn't engage with people enough. And I think that that's true to some degree, right? We could have notified the entire city in advance. We could have done countless meetings in advance to, discuss what it was going to look like. And I also recognize that that's also not how you treat an emergency. And so I'm always trying to balance, right? How much engagement, right? It's kind of a double-edged sword here. I want to talk to you, and also I need to respond to the fire that's in front of me as well. And doing that thoughtfully is very challenging. And I will say that I'm not perfect, and I own that upfront. I will acknowledge though that the Slow Streets program was built on, a year-long engagement process from the bicycle master plan. The streets that we pulled from it were the streets that the community members, at least up front, had shared with us that those were the streets they wanted to feel safe walking and bicycling in. So we didn't just pick streets out of thin air. We actually went to a plan that included a robust amount of engagement. Did we get it right? Certainly not. There's plenty of room for discussion about how to switch that up. I think where the other form of criticism that we also received, especially from DP East Oakland folks, was frankly not about slow streets, even though it was directed at the slow streets group, but actually about a distrust in government. I had people calling my office and saying, are you tricking Black people into getting COVID by putting them outdoors, right? That's not really slow streets. That is a whole different issue that we need to address. And it can't be solved just by the DOT's safety team. That speaks to 400 years of built up distrust in white people, in government, and in the actions that they and we take together to harm, especially communities of color. So that is another challenge. The other part is that, and this is, I think, that gets to the white urbanism of slow streets, is that I think a lot of people, and frankly, white urbanists, I think, to be honest, are using slow streets as a mission accomplished. And that's to me, that's the mistake. Slow Streets is an emergency response to an emergency. And we're going to continue, as we have every week, having conversations with community stakeholders to understand how to modify this and to kind of use it as a test subject to say, hey, you all have been actually screaming at me to fix the safety issue in your community. So we're moving quickly and now folks are upset, but we at least have clay to massage versus, and this is kind of where I stand, versus talking about something for 3 years and then not delivering on anything. Because that's also what city planning does. That's also what government does very well, is saying that we're going to do something and then not delivering on it. And so there's a duality here between engagement, right, and making sure that people are thoughtfully consulted and engaged, not just consulted, about a subject, and also delivering on your promises and iterating along the way. And so for whatever criticism we're receiving, and understandable criticism at that, from Slow Streets, people have asked me, well, what are the lessons learned? You know, like what are they going to be permanent? The only thing I'm willing to commit to that will be permanent out of Slow Streets is that we need to have regular conversations with our engagement groups, right? Like we have weekly meetings now with all of the East Oakland stakeholders. We have weekly meetings now with all of the transportation advocates. Like that is something that needs to stay permanent. Whether or not those barricades stay up, that's not the point. And frankly, they're temporary barricades. So like, I'll be honest with you, like calm down for a second. Like there's so many other opportunities to provide safety and community. But I think above all, and this is something that I've been very upfront about, is that I'm not interested in going to another child's funeral anywhere in East Oakland. Like that is also not fair. And to tell me that I'm wrong for trying to improve a very real issue in a community that I think deserves better is also not fair to both myself and my team. Did we get it perfect? No. But I think we should give credit where credit is due, that we're trying to improve people's lives and make sure they don't get run over by cars. And like that is like baseline what our safety team stands for. And it's really important that we at least level set there. Sorry, that's kind of frank, but that's where we are.
We're trying to have an honest conversation. So as we move into the next phase of this, really digging more into sort of know that anti-racism and urbanism sort of framing we set up, I'm going to put this on you and see how this goes. Now, what would you say anti-racism means in the context of the work you do yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think that it's funny. When I first started in city planning, so this is 10 years ago now, planners were just starting to have the conversation about like how to bring equity into the conversation. How do we sprinkle it on to the discussion, right? And now we're like, okay, you know, how do I be anti-racist? And one of the things I'm just going to repeat from several other amazing Black planners, so I'm not taking credit for this, is that city planning and by extension government is not neutral. All of the things that we do are hurting or not hurting groups of people, primarily Black and brown communities. And so I think that what anti-racism looks like is transforming kind of the questions that we are typically asking as like equity issues and saying like, oh, does this harm the Black and brown community? And switching that to a question about, are we advancing and prioritizing Black and brown communities to thrive and frankly, address historic wrongs, right? Like that is sort of the paradigm shift that I think is really underscoring what being anti-racist means in the context of my work. Whether that's bicycle lanes, whether it's BART stations, whatever, is this capital improvement furthering the needs of this group? And I think that one of the aspects that's really exciting about our bicycle master plan is in the first couple of pages, it talks about the fact that while normally, and in fact, the earlier bicycle master plan focuses squarely on capital improvements, this plan talks a lot about social programs that have nothing to do with riding a bike, well, nothing to do with the physical improvement of the bicycle infrastructure and everything to do with police stopping Black and brown men riding bicycles predominantly in East Oakland, right? Like that has nothing to do with bike lanes and everything to do with a conversation I need to have with our police chief. So that is also what it means to be anti-racist, is not only changing that paradigm to proactively addressing historic wrongs, but allowing for, and I've said this a number of times, allowing for an intersectional dialogue that is not just
Warren froze for me. Laura, can you hear him?
And I'm seeing that it's a connection on his end, not ours.
Not me.
The stories in.
Okay, Warren, for a little bit there. Warren's back, great. And now
did you not hear me? Sorry.
We missed about 3 minutes of your last, but I'm sure was awesome, but you're just gonna have to say it again.
Okay, sorry. I got this message.
No, you were at the part, the last part I heard was around sort of the bicycle plan, and that the parts of that weren't about capital improvements, were about the overstoppage of Black men in East Oakland, and you were on this tremendous sort of rise.
Okay, let's see if I can ride it again. I'm sorry, you guys. Let me turn on a whole bunch of airplane mode for other things in this house. Okay, so what I was saying was that being anti-racist is changing this paradigm of just accepting siloed answers about, you know, physical bicycle improvements or physical capital improvements, to actually allowing folks, and by folks I mean Black and brown people, to share their lived experiences that we don't normally engage with, right? And I think maybe this is where I cut off, is that planners are very good at siloing their conversations. Hi, I'm here to talk about a corridor improvement. Can you share with me how you feel about this specific affordable housing development, right? Like, okay, they're gonna share with you that, right? But then it totally divorces the fact that there's so many other elements to their answer that, that really need to be discussed. And so I'm gonna give you an example that kind of brings us all the way back to slow streets. The first 2 weeks of the feedback that we received about slow streets from our Deep East Oakland advocates were, I hate these barricades, get rid of them, we don't want slow streets. And I finally was like, okay, let me repeat back to you what I'm hearing so that I can confirm, and this is really what like active listening is all about, right? Like, let me confirm that this is what you're telling me. We put in a program to make sure that people don't get run over by cars and to provide, you know, flexible space, because it's not like the demographics changed in East Oakland. Like, people still don't have access to vehicles. And if AC Transit is running fewer buses, we should probably come up with a solution. So we came up with this idea. You don't like the barricades. And so you're telling me to take out all of the slow streets in East Oakland and by extension, keep them in North Oakland. Tell me more about what that means to you. And immediately they're like, wait a minute, that's not what we said. I'm like, that is exactly what you said. So tell me again what it is that you want me to do. And after now 2 months of dialogue, which has been fantastic, we got to the heart of the issue. So this is kind of the background that I think some of the viewers at home should know, is that folks had shared with us the literal barricades were part of the problem. They're upset, understandably, about the history of the BRT line and the construction impacts that happen in their community, and that these construction barricades were triggering to them because it felt like, once again, the government's coming in and jackhammering everything up, and without any consultation with the community, right? So like, they asked us to change the physical barricades, to use them as artistic opportunities. The second component was, they're like, what am I supposed to do on the street? I'm going to work every day and I don't have time to be jogging in my neighborhood. Okay, good to know, right? Like, but many of the parents that have started sharing these stories with us have said, I don't have a backyard, I live in an apartment building, and I would really like to get these kids out of the house. Can you provide programming on the street for these kids during the summer? So again, the reason I kind of share this story in line with being anti-racist is that I think that there's been a recent history, primarily, and I say this respectfully, but critically, of white city planners that were taught that equity meant going and asking Black and brown people yes or no after the program was baked, or even if it wasn't baked, but being immediately recoiled with the anger that they're receiving because they're the messenger. And I got to tell you guys, like, you have to like build a thicker skin, because the first and second and third answer you get might not actually be the answer. You have to come back for your lumps every single time and figure out why. Why is it that people are upset? What is it going to take to make this a success? And then to actually deliver on that. And that's, I think, the real work of being anti-racist, especially in terms of my work. Did you get all that? Great.
Got it all. No, one thing you said in there that I want to reiterate and elevate is just this idea of compartmentalization, that you can show up as an agent of the state and just be a planner, or just be a this, that, or the other. And that sort of, no, you're asking people to share their pain or share their frustration, but only just this little piece of it. And just how disrespectful that is, given the level of honesty you're asking of people to help solve a problem collaboratively, right? And that is not something we put on people who have means and access, who have people that they can pay to listen to whatever their complaints or frustrations are, and trying to reorient that.
And this is in part why, you know, and it's kind of funny because people are like, what's, you know, the OakDOT's engagement protocols? We pay our advocacy groups, like they are on our on-call bench, so that instead of going to them and getting their consultation, they're part of the team. They're inside the house, making sure, you know, inside the house, building the table, asking the questions to make sure that we're making sure that they have the trust and the space to push back on us in the team to say, you all are not asking the right questions, try again. Let's rebuild the plane and try and fly that one. Versus, I think the model that a lot of planning does, and it's not fair, and I'm even guilty of this as well, is, hey, can you please share your opinion with this? Even though your time is valuable, I'm just going to ask you something for free, right? Like, a lot of people want to get paid for their expertise, and we should probably pay them. The same is true for artists and a bunch of other programs. So why is it any different that the community you're trying to help and you're taking all their time, especially late at night when they're trying to feed their kids or just get some sleep, you're not paying them anything, or at least providing services that make their life easier during those times, right? Daycare, etc. Sorry, that's a quick tangent, but I think that that's critical as well.
No, I've been participating as a community member in the Howard Terminal CBA negotiations, and just the questions around how do you value the time, and like a lot of time of people who are trying to create a more equitable community-driven process, and that if you don't want it left to the people who get paid to be there, you got to figure out some way of creating some balance and that financial consideration, like dollars and cents, really. And this next question, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add really quickly, because I'm sure a lot of folks who are on this Zoom work in the government, right? Like, a very practical way to address that is through our procurement process, right? Like, when we go out when we request bids from our consultants, and we have, you know, these 10% DBE, you know, lines, bump that way up and stick to it and make sure that those groups are used. You know, you can't just say, well, this tiny little task is going to be used for greenlining, but otherwise, you know, you can continue about your work. Make sure that they have lead roles in the planning process, in the contracts, because that's really how you're going to get this work done correctly. Sorry, Ernest, please keep going.
Oh, no. This next question, I'm going to ask in a somewhat broad way, but I'm going to share sort of something in my workplace that one way you can kind of take this. Just what appetite have you seen in your workplace or broader community around getting much more imaginative about addressing some of the systemic barriers that Black folks face? So I'll just share, I was in a session in my place of work last week where they kind of invited some of the Black employees to gather, exclusively the Black employees to gather virtually, and just share about their experience at the firm. And there was a lot of consternation about, even though we have a Black man at the top, the last two CEOs have been Black men, but a lot of the Black women who fill the ranks of this organization do not feel any level of the upper mobility opportunities about that. And this sort of shifting dialogue from can we talk about equity and diversity and inclusion without talking about power and, you know, positional authority. That is how decisions are really made in this workplace. And I can see the beginnings of I don't want to call it more radical, but a more transformative dialogue about what meeting the moment means in our organization. And I'm just, so you don't have to go down that route, but want to put that question out there.
You know, that's actually partly what I want to talk about. So to first, I'll answer your question with a yes and a no. I think that there are a lot of people, and politely, a lot of white people, who are catching up to the everyday lived experience that Black people have no, you know, you give a nod to another Black guy and you're like, yep, I know. And that's the end of the conversation. And a million words have been said to all the Black people who are on this call. You know that nod where you're like, somebody says something and you just look at each other and you just said a whole essay and that's it. But I think that there are a lot of people who are still catching up to the everyday lived experiences that we have been sharing. And there's finally video evidence of it for people to say, oh, I didn't realize it was that bad, right? Like, wow, I didn't trust you before, but now that there's video evidence, I guess I should care about that. That's what this sounds like to me sometimes. And I mean that politely, but I want people to understand that there's also some friction, even for Black people in this moment, where suddenly everyone has figured out that racism still exists. So I'm gonna put that aside for a second. I think that there is opportunity, and I'm hopeful, I'm always hopeful, there's always optimism, that we can use this moment to challenge the structures of power. And I think that's critical and ironic given that I work in the mayor's office, and I'm going to acknowledge that it's the last couple of months have been a little awkward, and I feel very supported in my office, so don't take that the wrong way. I mean, I will even acknowledge that I've had very interesting conversations with my bosses and how to, you know, manage expectations. And it's been really, it's opened a lot of doors to, I think, important conversations that I can't share because they're private, but I want to say that we are having those dialogues. I think the important part of this moment too is that unlike other movements, because this is not a moment, this is a movement, I'm going to keep saying that, is that people have time, right? Like normally people are like, okay, I'm going to protest on Saturday and then I have to get back to work on Monday. And we're all sheltered in place. So people, I know that I hope people don't take that for granted. I don't mean it in a glib way, but people have time to keep at this. We're all at home, sitting in front of our computers, learning about what's happening all over the world and sharing our emotion in like live stream. And I think that's what makes this slightly different from a lot of other incidents when Black men got shot by police, because it's happened a lot. This is not the first time. Anyway, I'm just going to say that a number of times. But I worry, so, you know, that's the optimism that we have time and that people are staying focused on this issue. That's great. I worry, though, that my white colleagues and people who called me to check in, right, have not quite realized that this is still an opportunity for them to check in at their leisure and check out if things get rough. And I want to challenge all of you, for whoever's watching, right, to continue up this effort, right? Like, pick a chair because we're all in this for a while, right? Like, this is not going to be done in a couple of weeks. You know, we're all just going to go back to normal, right? Like, this is a sustained effort to actually improve the everyday lives of Black and brown people in this country that we have been trying to do since the day we got here on those ships. And I said that. So the other important critique here is that, and I posted this on my Twitter earlier, and I just want to be upfront about this, is that racism is not just an external issue that you attack outside of the house, right? I have experienced racism in my own work, right? We can be talking about equity and a white person will literally cut me off and tell me what equity means to them. That is also kind of racist and really dismissive. And those are also the types of microaggressions that make it really difficult for Black and brown people who are, you know, the few seats at the table to share their experiences and to lift up what it's like. And, you know, frankly, what kinds of policies might make things work. I think that that's really important for people to kind of take home, is that, like, take a look in the mirror politely and think, how have I lifted up the Black and brown people that have come in contact with me at work, in my everyday lives, right? Like, am I cutting them off? Am I supporting their ideas, right? Or am I dismissing the things that I don't understand and think might be, again, out of the silo that I'm used to? And that is also where the work needs to be done. And I know a bit about, you know, kind of the folks who participate in, you know, the YIMBY groups. So this is also for all of you to think about. This is not just an external issue to poke at the police department. We also play a role every day in our engagements with people, and we have to take ownership of that.
So we got a lot of good questions coming up from the audience, and I do want to get to those. So just the last one I'm going to throw out there from me is just if this moment of potential reimagination, where the city council is, as we speak, debating a path towards a radical reimagination of public safety. So if this is to go beyond public safety to so much of American society, including urbanism, again, in your field, what would need to happen, and what would that different path look like if we were to walk down it at this moment?
Returning to one of my points earlier, I think that treating emergencies like they're emergencies is probably a start, right? If housing is an emergency, let's treat it like one. And more importantly, if it is especially an emergency for Black and brown people, then we need to target our agenda towards that issue. Race cannot be taking a back seat to so many things that it is actually front and center on. I think that that's a way to move forward. I will be honest, I'm actually looking forward to watching the other webinars because I don't have all of the solutions. I, like many of you, are working towards understanding what we can do collectively. And I want to lift up that I know so many far more brilliant people than me. There are people of color that are really championing this work, and I don't want to take their words from them. So, just follow them as well. I am looking forward to seeing where the council lands. And I think one of the challenges for Oakland is that we also need to find a way to not just defund the police. The city doesn't have enough money to accomplish some of the things that it needs to. And don't get me wrong, I can see the police budget, I see their overtime, and y'all have seen that. So I don't need to make a comment on that. You get it. But even if you, and even if you defunded all of the police and reallocated that money to other groups, it probably still wouldn't be enough. And that is not to say that you shouldn't do it, but please acknowledge that there is even more work to be done in terms of what kinds of investments we need to make. And sometimes this isn't about money, right? Like some of these policies are just like, we've talked about this before, Ernest, right? Like zoning. You could just rezone certain neighborhoods and change your policy, and that doesn't cost you money, but it has an impact on the community you might be trying to help, or a community that you might ultimately end up harming, right? And so I want folks, I might have said this on Twitter as well. I've been on Twitter a lot. I've discovered how threads work, so sorry. I want people to keep the same energy for a bunch of other stuff that impacts people's daily lives, and especially Black and brown people. We have a general plan coming up, and we're gonna have 2 years of engagement. I expect all of you to be showing up to those meetings and demanding that there's clarity around how we're going to be helping Deep East Oakland residents, how we're going to be helping homeless people not be homeless anymore, right? Like there is a very real opportunity to continue to make change that is not just focused on the police, right? Like general plan is coming up. Our housing element keeps getting updated, and like, what's the engagement process on that, right? RENA numbers just came out. I hope you all know what they are because the numbers are big, and having a conversation about where we target those housing units and whether or not we're going to meet our affordability goals is really critical. Similarly, as we start rebuilding the economy, which jobs are going to come back? Which jobs are going to get reinvestments? Which jobs are going to not come back? And who are we spending our delicate resources on to help them get back into the fold? So my challenge to all of you is, as we're thinking not just about defunding the police and being anti-racist, but please apply this lens to a whole host of other, frankly, all of the work that we do, and keep the same energy. Like, just stay engaged.
Okay, an audience question. I'm shortening it a bit, but it's saying housing advocacy is anti-racist because it undoes segregation, but is that enough? And there's some embedded assumptions in there. But what can casual urbanists do to ensure that we are fully anti-racist in our advocacy? And feel free to say I'm going to meet I'm the advocate, not you.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, Ernest, you tell me. One critique that I actually have of YIMBY is that I think, and this is specifically about housing policy, is that I think that there's sort of a wanton disregard for where housing should go and who it's for, right? You see a vacant lot, throw a building on it, right? Put a bird on it, right? Like, oh, this house is too low for the neighborhood, let's put a triplex, right? But one of the things that I don't think people really think about is that middle period during the construction, right? Like, who's impacted by that, and are we keeping those people whole? And then ultimately, are there programs in place to allow for the people we're really trying to help to gain access to those homes? And one of the things that perhaps the first 30 people heard about when when we were shooting the shit was that when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about rental. And unless we decouple the fact that so many other policies are related to home ownership, then we need to focus our effort on affordable home ownership and helping people invest in their home so that they get the tax basis, so that they get rebates, so that they have opportunities to invest in other capital. And until they do that, we're still going to continue to kind of make the same problems worse. I don't know if I addressed that issue, but that's my opinion.
No, and I'm just going to answer from a little side project I've been engaging on a lot recently, which is there are so many pieces of the whole build more housing thing that can be to the benefit of Black people. They can live in them. They can work to construct them. They can design them. They can do all these pieces of that. They can finance them because we have some money. And just this lack of imagination about the role that we can and should be allowed to play, particularly when this in our neighborhood about this type of change, is I think a deep lack of imagination. And when I spend time talking to my neighbors in West Oakland and South Berkeley, these historically Black neighborhoods with no home ownership, like you were speaking to, Warren, they get excited about home ownership when they get to control some of the process and see some of the gains. And it's not simply a matter of who gets to live there. They're happy with three white neighbors as long as they got to build that house and that plot of land their families own for a couple of generations or things like that. So I think it really does require more conversations and more listening, frankly, So like what people want to see and what kind of power they want to wield and this change that development brings with it.
Yeah, I love your point about, that Black people play a role other than just living in those homes, that you could be an architect, you could be a designer, like all of those other factors play a part in the development process and in housing that often we overlook. I think we regularly overlook.
There's a couple different questions that are all kind of getting to the, what wisdom do you think you can share with the YIMBY movement, since you brought us up specifically about like what kind of policies we should be trying to adopt or push forward or think more critically about as we try to center anti-racism more in our work?
Whew, a lot to say, but I know we have short on time. I will start by saying that I think that there's been a lot of conversations, not just with YIMBY, but housing advocates that focus primarily on reinvesting in downtowns, which I think is a good movement, right? And also identifying low-income neighborhoods that we can invest in. And when you invest in property and not in people, then you might be kicking those people out. And that's really important to know. I think the other thing too is that, and I saw a little bit of this, but I'll give an example of something that I think is the wrong move that a YIMBY group should be thinking about, is that the College of Community, or the College of the Arts, CCA, it's up the street on Broadway in Oakland, they had proposed a high rise on their property, and the community of Rockridge freaked out. And that was to be expected because there aren't any high rises over there. But I will share with you thoughtfully that I had a conversation with some of the planners internally at the city. And I said, wow, this is so exciting. Finally, some density in a neighborhood that has been really resistant to change in community character. And the response was, actually, we're going to ask them to tone that down because it really is, a problem for community character. And I found that really frustrating and frankly kind of racist, because I was like, we don't talk about community character when it comes to the West Oakland BART station, which again, I'm excited that all the development in affordable housing is coming, but why is it that we apply these standards to wealthy white neighborhoods and not to Black neighborhoods, right? Black and brown neighborhoods. That is something that I think YIMBY could really work on, is bringing that energy to other neighborhoods, right? Like there are several BART stations in very low density neighborhoods that are predominantly white. And that's interesting to me that we continue to allow that if we're really about making sure that people have affordable access to transit and housing, that's probably a really good place to start.
I'm going to ask this question exactly as written.
Okay.
Many people of color don't have the privilege to imagine their future. How can we change this? Yeah. Feel free to answer the question if something's embedded in the question.
That, as the kids say, that hit different. Yeah, like that's real. And that goes a little bit to what I was saying before about like, asking why, like getting to the deeper issues, coming back for a deeper conversation. But that's hard. Like, I don't have a perfect answer for that, but I think that's really hard because part of that relies on a very long-standing history of telling Black and brown people that we aren't going to amount to something, and then being surprised when we don't amount to something, right? And then blaming people for not getting there. And so the same thing is true for zoning and for housing development and for engaging in the future of a city. So I think that a first step, and I'm stealing this quote from a gentleman that I just met named Juma, that we as government, I think, and by extension advocates, need to do a better job of creating spaces that allow people to feel vulnerable, to allow people to share their authentic selves in a space that they don't feel like they're going to be judged or critiqued or dismissed. Because that, I think, is when you really start to get to the full honesty, and I agree with Juma's point, to get to the full honesty of what people are looking for and what makes them feel whole. And again, what makes them feel like they belong. And it's really hard to make those spaces, especially when you are, working with a group of people who don't trust you. And so starting with trust is always a good start.
Just one add-on I'd make is taking the time to invest in the skill building of these tools that we use to sort of discuss whatever the expertise is. So planning has all these things I absolutely don't understand. And I've been doing this for 4 years, but I think we create these barriers of sort of technical expertise and make it hard for people to imagine in a way that can be understood as well. And I've seen some exercises that have tried to write that in terms of investing in people's capacity to speak in a way that can be translated into action, given the sort of tools available. One other good question that, again, you can throw it back and I'm probably answer too. It seems pretty clear to me that the YIMBY movement is centered around the white experience. It wasn't until white yuppies were feeling the housing rental crunch that the YIMBY movement began in earnest. Do you think that a movement like this can ever be a cross-racial coalition? Are there successful examples you've seen of cross-racial coalitions with YIMBYs working together to create housing developments?
Wow. Damn. I mean, you said it. They're not wrong. Like, I think that that's a very good point. And
I can take it.
Like, I'm gonna let you take that because that's real. And I kind of mentioned that before that, oh, someone said, can Warren answer this? So hold on, let me try and answer it then. Damn. Yes, I see a place for that. And I think that part of it is like really bringing in the people who are, again, not the folks that you typically expect to be on the front lines to say, you should change the zoning of this neighborhood, because frankly, a lot of people don't know what zoning is, and they probably shouldn't have to, right? Like, it's a little weird to use these ridiculous words to describe a neighborhood that kids should feel safe playing in, and that there are enough parents in the neighborhood that they can share resources, right? Like, that's the way that I think a lot of people want to talk about the development of a neighborhood. And we need to allow more spaces for that. I think that what YIMBY does really well is challenges the technical, precise, policies of zoning code and of, design review and of our policies and practices. So there's a linkage there, right? There's a translation that I spoke about earlier, which is, and I say it again, there is a privilege to understanding how to relate to a city planner, how to tell them, oh, that's an R2 and I think it should be an R3, right? Like, we know what that means, but like most people don't and really shouldn't need to know about that. Right. So I think that there's totally an opportunity, but it's gonna take some soul searching on YIMBY's part and some mea culpa on their part as well, because like they've also played a role in kind of, I think inadvertently perhaps, I won't put this all on you and other people, Ernest, but like, dismissing communities of color when they're like, hey, I don't really want you to upzone this community. And that might be seen as NIMBYism, when really it's like, well, I don't want you to upzone it because if you do, my rent's gonna go up, then I'm gonna get kicked out, and I have really great affordable housing and I can't afford anything near here, so I'm just gonna have to leave, right? Like, you have to be open to understanding the full person's experience and why they might be pushing back on what might be your central seminal focus of like, YIMBY is about, yes, in my backyard, it's about development. But I don't think Black and brown people focus their identity around development, right? Like, they focus it around like culture and art and about experience and about community. And so you have to meet us, right? Like, on those levels, right? Ask the questions not about, hey, where do you want more housing? It's, hey, do you want more neighbors here? Do you want more parks to play with your kids here, right? Like, translate this into people's lived experiences.
No, it's funny you said
that. Did I answer that well?
No, you did, and I'll answer a little bit as well briefly because I never get into time. But one of the groups that when I think about in Oakland who is close to YIMBY but would never call themselves such is the Black Cultural Zone. And it's important that they put cultural in the name because that they are trying to create a locus of culture for Black people in East Oakland. And if that means building some stuff, then fine. But they're not building stuff for building's sake. They're building it the whole culture and space for Black people. And I think that reimagination of development is to serve what purpose and whose purpose and who gets to decide what that is and who gets to benefit from that. And to directly answer the question as written, I think the only way the YIMBY movement succeeds is as a cross-racial coalition. And I think we should look at, I choose to look at it as an opportunity that no white middle-class people with no decent paying jobs have been pushed into housing insecurity or some form of housing insecurity that forces them to have to learn about this Byzantine system designed to keep out people like me, but is now keeping them out. And now we are trapped in this thing together. And not to go too far into the current uprisings, but it is frankly when white people see themselves as being chewed up by these same systems of oppression designed for me, but indiscriminate and hurting you, that we have an opportunity to do something about it. Because as long as I'm the only one hurt, nobody gives a damn.
And so I'm going to say something that's a little bit, well, it's salacious. I'm going to own this. And one of the things that I worry about some of the videos that I have watched on Twitter and then seeing the reactions of people's, like horror and seeing this is that, the first round of videos was Black and brown people getting killed by the police. And we've been seeing that for a while, like a long while. And kind of returning to one of your earlier questions, and I know some of the people on this might take offense to this, so I'm sorry about it, but I question whether or not the outrage that people are experiencing is more attributed to watching white people, just to your point, experience the same brutality, and that their angst is actually about that. And then they have to then align it with, oh, I guess Black people have been telling me about this whole time, so now I have to care. And that I find a little bit frustrating because, and I don't think everyone falls in that camp. So I don't want to cast everyone aside. So I'm just going to be very careful about that. But please be aware that if the way that you're understanding racism is by saying, well, I didn't care about Black people having this problem, but now that I'm experiencing it, I guess I care. Like, that's something that we need to work on. And I'm here for the conversation. I think to answer your question earlier, Ernest, too, though, one of the roles that YIMBY could play is really demystifying the ways in which development works, the ways in which community benefits projects work, right? Like the ways in which zoning works. Like, I think it's funny, I pride myself on trying to explain to people, like, here are all the levers, here's what they do in the machine, right? Let's work on what the goal is, and then I'm going to tell you which levers they're hiding, so that, it's like the secret menu at In-N-Out Burger, right? Like, you don't know that you can ask for all the ingredients on the fries, but once I've told you, now everybody wants animal style fries. And sorry, I'm hungry, so that's what I'm thinking about. But that's the same thing about government, and I think this is a role that advocates like YIMBY can really play, is really helping people who've been locked out of these conversations understand the language that people are using, so that when they show up to these meetings that are at stupid hours of the day, or now they're on Zoom, which is great, that they can use that time precisely to say, thank you, planner Eric, I'm making up a name here. Eric, I see that you're proposing a height limit of 125 feet, and I actually think it should be 85 feet, and here's why. And to know why it is that there is a structural difference between 125 feet and 85 feet when it comes to, construction practices and the materials that are used and the time it takes to build it, and, whether or not it's going to be an affordable unit, right? Like, understanding that, and I know some of you on this call will understand the difference, and being able to explain that to people who have been locked out of this experience is really critical.
No, I mean, to me, that's such a nice hope. We have to end there, because one, I think we're both getting hungry and going to start pontificating soon, and two, just that note of sort of what has always inspired me and kept me involved in the YIMBY movement. It has brought together these people who are either have that kind of expertise about the way this process works, or devote their time to sort of acquire it as sort of novices at the beginning, and the opportunity to liberate that knowledge in a way with people who currently either don't have it and don't get it, or rely on intermediaries that sort of make it challenging for their true purposes to be expressed. So that's another topic. And I think we can try to free that information up and make it more usable, so that more, because we believe when you poll people, they want a world that looks more like the world we want. So if we truly believe that, we got to empower them to create that world. Exactly.
Yes, and.
Yeah. Okay, so going to bring this to a close. So thank you, Warren. This was great. I guess I hope to see you around town soon, but socially distant and masks and all that good stuff. And I hope you attend the rest of these sessions, because each one will be very different. You are a government person, going to have some researchers and some other kind of thought leaders, so should be a good time. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, A, go to ymbaction.org/join and become part of the movement. And then two, our next conversation is a week from today, so next Tuesday, June 30th at 6:30, with Kelsey Brewer, who's policy manager at Jamboree Housing, California's largest affordable housing developer. So we had some thoughts about affordable housing, but we're going to get deeper with Kelsey, so it should be a real good time. So with that, thank you, and I will see you all next week.
Thanks.